last year made $100 billion in profit. They could pay a modest tax to help us make public colleges and universities tuition-free and cancel all student debt in this country. Four years ago, I came to New Hampshire, and I was criticized once again for another quote-unquote radical extreme idea. What I said then, and I repeat now, is health care is a human right, not a privilege. And I was told that was a radical idea, but I want all of you to know that poll after poll after poll now tells and high deductibles, and you're paying more in premiums than you could afford to pay. And what that means is that when people are paying so much and have such high out-of-pocket expenses, they hesitate to go to the doctor when they should. And the result of that is some 30,000 Americans die every single year. We believe that when you get sick, regardless of your income, you should be able to go to the Medicare for all. And Medicare for all, when we talk about health care as a human right, what we also understand, it's not just the tens of millions who are uninsured or underinsured, not just the 30,000 who have died, not just the working class people who are spending 20, 25% of their incomes on health care. What we are talking about, unbelievably, simple. It is to make as much in profit as it can for the healthcare industry, for the insurance companies, the drug companies, and other parts of the healthcare industry. And I want you all to hear this. Last year, the top 10 drug companies in America, who are charging us by far the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs, made $69 billion in profit. A couple of weeks ago, some of you may know, I went up to Windsor, Ontario, with a number of folks from the Midwest who are diabetic. Diabetes, a growing serious problem in America. 7.5 million people in this country need insulin to deal with their diabetes. We went from Detroit, Michigan to Windsor, Ontario, 15-minute ride in a bus. Anyone here know the differential in price in Windsor, Ontario for insulin compared to the United States? 10 to 1. We are paying 10 times more for the exact same product made by the exact same company. And it's not just insulin. What I learned on that trip, I didn't know this. 7.5 million people who are diabetic dealing with insulin, 1/4 of them are rationing their insulin, which is an extremely dangerous thing to have to do. And while we were on that trip, there was a young man and his mother. The guy was a football player, big guy. And he had diabetes. He has diabetes, and he uses insulin. And a couple of years ago, he lied to his parents because they were already spending so much money on his diabetes. He lied. He said, yeah, I got all the insulin I need. He didn't. He was rationing it. He's a football player, and his health deteriorated. That family saved $10,000 on that trip buying insulin in Canada. And again, it's not just insulin. It is prescription drug after prescription drug, and it's not just Canada. Countries all over the world pay a fraction of the price of what we pay for prescription drugs because we are the only country, major country on earth, that allows the pharmaceutical industry to do anything they want and charge us any price they want. And we together are going to end that absurdity. So let me tell you a little bit about Medicare for All, because my views on the issue will be distorted not only by Democratic opponents, but mostly by the healthcare industry, which, as I mentioned, made $100 billion in profits last year, and which is prepared to spend many hundreds of millions of dollars to protect their profits. Now, I'm told by my critics that a Medicare for All system would be destructive of healthcare in America. It would cause chaos in America, disruption in America, total, absolute nonsense. In fact, what we are proposing would cause less disruption than any of the other plans that are out there. Right now, as you all know, we have a program for senior citizens 65 or older called Medicare, created in 1965 by Lyndon Johnson and a Democratic Congress, called Medicare. Happens to be the most popular health insurance program in the country. Is Medicare perfect? No, it is not. And one of its deficiencies is today it does not cover dental care, which is a big deal for seniors who need dentures, etc. It doesn't cover hearing aids, which are quite expensive, or eyeglasses. Under our Medicare for All plan, we cover dental care, eyeglasses, and hearing aids. How do we implement Medicare for All? Not complicated at all, pretty simple. Right now, people are in the program 65 or older. There are millions and millions of people who are today 58, 60, 62, who cannot wait until they get into Medicare because they have health care needs that they want addressed. What we do in the first year is lower the eligibility age for Medicare from 65 down to 55. Next year, we go from 55 down to 45, then down to 35, and then we cover every man, woman, and child in this country. That's it. That is it. That ain't complicated. That is a lot less complicated than many of the other proposals out there, which in fact are very complicated. Because one of the problems of many that we have with our dysfunctional healthcare system is not just that we are spending twice as much per capita as other people in any other industrialized country, is that the system today is enormously bureaucratic and complicated. that half the people spend hour after hour arguing with the insurance companies. Am I covered? Am I not covered? Why did you reject my claim? You got people who are PhDs who can't figure out what's in the policy. You thought you were covered. You turned out not to be covered. A good friend of mine has good health insurance. Turns out a procedure that he needed was not covered, $3,000 out of pocket. So what we are doing is ending the complexity. And that means no co-payments, no premiums, no deductibles, no out-of-pocket expenses. Is it free? No, it's going to be paid for out of the tax base. Just was in Wolfboro. We had a wonderful meeting in Wolfboro a few hours ago. And a woman stood up. She said, Bernie, she was in her 60s, I think, and she said, I am paying about $10,000 in premiums and then I got a $5,000 deductible. So when people ask me, how are you going to pay for it? We are already paying for it. We are spending twice as much per person on health care as do the people of any other countries. Now, my Republican friends tell me people hate taxes. I guess they think people love premiums. Oh, boy, what a great day. I could pay my $1,000 in premiums. Oh, how thankful I am to pay $5,000 out of my own pocket, to pay 10% copayment, 20% copayment. What our bill will do is lower the cost of health care for the overwhelming majority of the American people. Will you pay more in taxes? Yes, but it'll be far less than what you are paying now for a dysfunctional, complicated, wasteful, and bureaucratic system. Now, if poll after poll shows that the American people want to move to Medicare for all, why is there so much opposition? Where does the opposition come from? And this is the crisis, not only in healthcare, but in many other areas that we face as a nation. Doesn't matter what the American people want. What matters in Washington is what wealthy and powerful corporate interests want. So right now, you got the healthcare industry made $100 billion in profit. If they spent, and they likely will, 1% of their profits in fighting Medicare for all, meaning 30-second ads and full-page advertisements in your newspaper and in the magazines you read. 1% of $100 billion is $1 billion. That is what we are up against. Over the last 20 years, the healthcare industry has spent over $4 billion on lobbyists and campaign contributors, campaign contributions to Republicans and Democrats. They own the United States Congress. And what we are telling them is that we are sick and tired of a system which is killing people, which is taking money out of hard-working, working-class people who cannot afford the high cost of health care. We're sick and tired of paying the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. We want a health care system designed to provide quality health care to every man, woman, and child in this country, not to make outrageous profits for the insurance companies and the drug companies. That is what this fight is about. But when we talk about corporate power, we're talking not just about health care. We're talking not just about the power of the pharmaceutical industry. We're talking about virtually every other issue. I don't have to, and I don't want to, because it's really quite painful, and I don't want to bring you all through this again. We have all seen what happened in El Paso. We have seen what happened in Dayton. We have seen what has happened in schools throughout this country. And what has happened is unspeakable. It is unimaginable. And it's hard to believe that we are becoming numbed to the impact of some deranged person walking into a room with an assault weapon and killing people right and left. It's painful, and I don't even want to talk about it because it is so disgusting. All right? But the bottom line here is that the American people in urban America and in rural America, gun owners and non-gun owners, and I know in New Hampshire and Vermont we got a lot of gun owners, but people all over this country now know that we need to do something to address the horror of gun violence that we have seen over the last many years. Does anybody have a magical solution? The answer is no. Nobody does. But what things we can do are common sense and are supported by the vast majority of the people. We need to expand background checks to make sure that people who should not own guns do not own guns. We need to do away with the gun show loopholes, which allow people to legally buy guns without undergoing a background check. We need to do away with the so-called straw man provision, which allows somebody to walk into a gun shop, legally buy a dozen guns, and then sell those guns to a criminal element and to gangs and so forth. In my view, and this has been my view for 30 years, assault weapons, semi-automatic weapons, are weapons of war. They are designed to kill people as quickly as possible. In my view, we should not be having the sale and distribution of assault weapons in this country. They should be banned. And we should go further. But here is the point that I want to make, and we can argue about guns, and somebody will have a different idea, and we got to listen to ideas. Everybody recognizes, no matter what your politics are, the horror of what we have seen in recent years. And the fear, by the way. You know, one of the things that gets me, it's not only the loss of life, but what we are seeing in school after school. I was in Iowa a couple of months ago. This guy's about 6'2", big guy, comes up and he says, you know, Senator, in my school, the kids are scared about going to school. Kids in New Hampshire, kids in Vermont, they're under drills. They have drills as to what to do if, God forbid, something terrible happens in the school, how to protect them. Teachers involved in that. Think about the trauma of this on the children of America and the fear that they are dealing with every single day. That should not be happening. So I don't have any magical answers, and I can't promise you to snap my finger and end all this stuff. But what I can tell you is that we have got to do everything that we can to end this horrific level of gun violence in America. Now, that's not just my view. That is the view of the American people. There are disagreements. But what I just described to you is supported by the majority of the American people. So you might ask, if this is what the American people want, why is Congress not dealing with it? Specifically, why is the United States Senate not dealing with this issue? And the answer is one word, or maybe three words. It's called the NRA. And the time is now for the United States Congress, for Mitch McConnell, for the Republican leadership, to have the guts to bring common sense gun safety legislation to the floor of the Senate. Let us debate that issue. There's another issue. I mean, there are many, many issues out there. But I want to touch on, you know, and it's people often ask me, the media says to me, well, what is the most important issue? I don't know what the most important issue, all of these issues, decent wages, health care for all, dealing with gun violence, all of these are important issues. But I'll tell you another issue that we can no longer afford to push under the rug. And despite what the President of the United States says, tragically and dangerously, climate change is not a hoax. Climate change is already causing devastating harm in this country and countries all over the world. And what the scientists tell us in almost a unanimous voice is if we do not get our act together boldly and aggressively, that within the next 12 years, there will be irreparable harm done in our country and around the world. But once again, you have a situation where every day more and more Americans understand the danger of climate change. They are seeing it with their own eyes. They're seeing it with flooding and droughts and extreme weather disturbances in this country, understanding that just July was the warmest month on record, looking at what's going on in Europe and unprecedented heat waves in France, the UK, and other countries, understanding that we're looking, according to the CIA and the Department of Defense, potential of mass migrations of people from one area to another because they can't find drinking water or they can't find ground that they could grow their crops on. We got an international crisis on our hands. And why aren't we dealing with this? Well, I'll tell you once again why. Because it has to do with the power of corporate entities, in this case, the fossil fuel industry. And what we say, and I speak as the father of 4 and the grandfather of 7, I am determined, as I know you are, to do everything we can to make sure the planet we leave our children and our grandchildren is a planet that is healthy and is habitable. Now, climate change, as all of you know, is by definition not an American issue. It is a global issue. We cannot do it alone. But instead of having a president that we currently have who thinks climate change is a hoax, if I'm in the White House, what I will do is lead the world, bring the world together, and tell countries, whether it is Russia, China, India, Brazil, whatever it may be, that instead of spending $1.5 trillion every single year on weapons of destruction, weapons designed to kill each other, maybe we should use those resources against our common enemy, which is climate change. And our message to the fossil fuel industry is that we cannot allow them to destroy this planet for their short-term profits. All right. The message of our campaign, and those are just some of the issues that are out there, and I want to take your comments and your questions. The message of our campaign is us, not me. And that is not just a bumper sticker, although it probably will be a bumper sticker, but it is a profound message for 2 reasons. Number one, there are some people who think the function of life, and this is what Trump believes, function of life is to make as much money as you possibly can, and you step on people all over the way. You cheat, you lie, you steal, you do what you can do. And then if you make your billions, you are a great success in life. That's one way of looking at human life. There's another way that says a more civilized and better society is one in which my family has to care about your family, and your family has to care about my family, and we are in this together as human beings. And that is one part of what I mean by us, not me. But there's another part even deeper. And that is, I am the only candidate running for president who will tell you a simple truth. And that is that no president, not Bernie Sanders or anybody else, can do it alone. I'm not here to say, vote for me and I'm going to solve all of these problems. You don't worry about it. Send me to Washington, send me to the White House, and I'm going to do it all. You don't have to worry about it. That is exactly what I am not saying. And the reason for that is that we have got to ask ourselves, how does it happen? After all of the great speeches we have heard for 40 or 50 years, after all of the great party platforms, after all of the legislation passed, how does it happen that the average American worker today, despite huge increases in technology and productivity, is not earning one nickel more than he or she did 45 years ago? How does it happen that over the last 30 years, the top 1% have seen a $21 trillion increase in their wealth, while the bottom half of American society has seen a $900 billion decline in their wealth? How does it happen that today 3 people in America, 3 people, own more wealth than the bottom half of American society? And 50% of our people are living paycheck to paycheck, scared to death that if somebody in the family gets sick, they don't know what they can do about it. Scared to death that if their car breaks down, not going to be able to get to work. Can't get to work, you don't have any income. Don't have any income, can't take care of your kids. That's the reality of economics in America today. And the reason for that is not because everybody in Washington is stupid or ugly or on the take. The reason for that is you have a corporate power system in which these large, powerful corporations and the 1% exercise unbelievable power over the economic and political life of this country. If we are going to pass Medicare for all, there ain't no easy way around it. We're going to have to stand up to the drug companies. We're going to have to stand up to the insurance companies and defeat them. If we are going to save the planet, I could give you a 500-page program on how we can address climate change. It doesn't mean anything unless we are prepared to take on the power of the fossil fuel industry. So what our campaign is about is, in fact, taking on Wall Street, taking on the insurance companies, taking on the drug companies, taking on the military-industrial complex, taking on the fossil fuel industry, taking on the prison industrial complex. And while we're at it, we're taking on the corporate media as well. You know, if you look at the Washington Post, which is owned by the wealthiest guy in this country, a guy named Jeff Bezos, we fought with the workers at Amazon to get them $15 an hour. We have pointed out over and over again that Amazon made $10 billion in profit last year. You know how much they paid in taxes? You got it, 0. Any wonder why the Washington Post is not one of my great supporters? I wonder why. New York Times, not much better. All right, but that's what we're up against. We knew it when we got into it. We're taking on them all, because I'll tell you this. I thought long and hard. Jane and I thought long and hard about whether we should run. Because, you know, when you're running in a presidential campaign, my God, there's a lot of ugliness out there. And, you know, for your tax on your family and everything else. All right, we knew that. But we decided to run for 2 reasons, which I believe true then and I believe now. Number one, we are the strongest campaign to be able to defeat Donald Trump. Over the last year, I don't know how many dozens of polls there have been out there. Polls are polls. Take them with a grain of salt. But you look at all of the polls done over the last year, in every single poll, we have defeated Donald Trump nationally, just the other day by 8 points on a poll. All right. But that's only one of the reasons. It's not just about beating Trump. It is about transforming this country and creating an economy and a government that finally works for all of us, not just the 1%. And what us, not me, means is that I can't do it alone. You have 6 banks on Wall Street that have assets of 50% of the GDP of the United States, over $10 trillion. How do you stand up to these banks? How do you stand up to the insurance companies and the drug companies and the fossil fuel industry? The only way that change has ever, real change, has ever taken place, it's not from the top on down, it's from the bottom on up. And that's the history of the civil rights movement, the history of the trade union movement, the history of the women's movement, history of the gay movement, the history of the environmental movement. That's how change takes place. And right now, in this unprecedented moment in American history, we need to bring our people together all across this country to tell corporate America that this country belongs to all of us, not just the few. No, it's not Bernie. I don't want to break that bad news to you. It's not Bernie, it's you. All right? Ain't me. We're in this together. All right. It's hot as heck here, and I don't want to keep people forever. Let's take a few questions or comments. Anybody have any questions? I see a woman way in the back. Let's get do we have a mic? All right, let's get a mic to that woman in the... All right, see if we can get her. Yeah. Thank you very much. I need it.
Hi.
Hi.
I voted for you in the 2016 election, but I have a new concern.
Yep.
Many of your critics are using your self-declared label Democratic Socialist against you.
Yep.
And I'm confident that if you're the Democratic nominee, the Trump administration will be relentless in its attacks on you, using fear tactics to warn people not to vote for a socialist. You have so much in common with Elizabeth Warren, who has called herself a capitalist. If you win the nomination, how will you convince the public that in many respects we already have a socialist system?
Well,
and why should we vote for you over Warren?
Okay. Well, I don't want... Elizabeth is a friend of mine, and you will make that decision yourself. All I will tell you is you're right. We have a socialist society right now. We give hundreds of billions of dollars in tax breaks and subsidies to the fossil fuel industry, to the pharmaceutical industry, to industry after industry all over this country. That is called corporate welfare. So I happen to believe in democratic socialism for working people, not large profitable corporations. And let's talk about what we mean. I don't want to get anyone too nervous here, but when we talk about democratic socialism, what do you think Social Security is? What do you think Medicare is, the most popular health insurance? What do you think your public library is? What do you think your police department is? Now look around the world. The ideas that I am talking about, and you're right, Trump will attack me, but you know what? He'll attack. He lies all of the time. He'll attack anybody. He'll attack the most conservative Democrat as a socialist. But let's look. Let's talk about where we are and where we want to go. In countries around the world, you have quality, affordable, universal child care. I want that. Is that socialist? I don't think so. In this country, I want to do what every other major country does on earth, provide health care to all people as a right. Throughout the rest of the world, when you have a baby, in Norway, for example, you get virtually an entire year off in parental leave. Woman does, and the husband gets time off as well. You want to call that socialism? So I think that you can call it whatever you want. You can call it social democracy, which exists throughout Europe. You could talk about workers' rights. You could talk about retirement programs, which are much stronger for the elderly than what we have right now. So when I talk about democratic socialism, it means two things. Number one, having the guts to finally take on the corporate elite which controls our economic and political life. It means unabashedly and without any apologies, standing with the working class of this country, which has been ripped off year after year, decade after decade. So the ideas that I am talking about, whether it's education, whether it's health care, whether it is ending this grotesque level of income and wealth inequality, you can call it whatever you want. That's what I believe, and you know what? Vast majority of the American people believe that too. All right. Okay, other questions? Okay, question right there. Ma'am? Yep. Yeah, wait for the mic.
Bernie, I'm actually going to change up the question that I had for you because of something you said.
Okay.
I had wanted to ask you what you would do, but now, because of what you have said to us and what I truly believe, I'm going to ask you what we can do. In my life now, I am surrounded by, there's hate everywhere and anger, and it's really hard to talk to other people with differing points of view and to build bridges. So my question to you is, how can we do that? How can we start building unity again in this country with that idiot in the White House ripping us apart? And I have a follow-up question.
Well, that's a good enough question to start with. All right, look, you're right. You know, I have Republican friends who are honest people who I disagree with. They are not racist. They're not sexist. They're not xenophobes. They don't propagate hatred. They're conservatives. It's not a crime to be a conservative. And we work together. And by the way, I'm happy to tell you that just recently I worked with one of the most conservative members of the United States Senate, a guy named Mike Lee from Utah. And Mike and I worked together to successfully pass a resolution to get the U.S. out of the Saudi-led intervention in the horrific war in Yemen. As the former chairman of the U.S. Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs, something that I feel very strongly about, and that when people put their lives on the line to defend this country, we provide them with all of the benefits that they have earned. All right? But what I have done in that regard is work with the late John McCain. John and I worked together to pass, probably the most comprehensive veterans bill passed in recent years. It wasn't perfect. I wasn't happy with the results all that much, nor was John. But that's what we did. We worked together. But to answer your question, I think the best way forward is to understand that while there is a lot of hatred, and that should bother us all, we should be able to have civil discourse. You disagree with me, that's fine. You don't have to hate me, or I don't have to hate you. But at the end of the day, I think what we can understand is that more of the American people are in agreement on issue after issue than you would think. Whether you're Republican or Democrat, you understand that we have a health care crisis, and you don't throw 32 million people off the health care they have, which is what Trump attempted to do. Whether you are a Republican or a Democrat, you understand we need a strong educational system. Whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, you understand that climate change is a massive threat to our country and the rest of the world. So I think there is more common ground than people understand. And our job, unlike Trump, is not to foment hatred and division, but to bring people together. And where we disagree, we can disagree. It's called democracy. Nothing to be ashamed about that. But that's kind of what I will do. Okay. Okay, I see another hand way in the back. Yes, ma'am. Pink, yeah. Get her a mic. Yep. Not too often, but I do go.
Thank you, Mr. President, for
Thank you.
joining us. I might be your #1 patriot. We're coming from Rochester, New York. And in New York, in May, there was a bus driver who had raped a 14-year-old student that was driving on his bus. He never went to prison, and he only got probation. And I see it happening over and over and over again. And I know everything that you stand for. I agree with it all. And when discussing the drug epidemic, the corrupt justice system, the healthcare system, and I feel that this is very strong, that never gets discussed. Where do you stand on, do you believe these sexual predators need harsher punishment? And is there a way that maybe for us you could tie into this very undiscussed but huge epidemic that...
Yes, the answer, of course, is yes. And I think if you study my record, I don't know that there's any debate that anyone here thinks that if somebody commits rape, that is not a horrific crime which deserves severe punishment. I don't know that there's anybody who would disagree with that. Certainly not me. But I do want to broaden your question, if I might, and talk about the issue of women's rights in general, which are now under assault all across this country. So let me just simply say, and I'm sure that not everybody in the room agrees with me, but I happen to believe very strongly that it is a woman who should be able to control her own body, not politicians. And I also believe we have got to deal with a very serious question, and that is, in this country, women make about 80 cents on the dollar compared to men. And if you're a minority woman, a black woman or a Latino woman, the number is much lower. We need in this country to move forward aggressively to make sure we have equal pay for equal work. All right? All right. Okay. Yeah, gentleman, young man over there. Yep, hand up by the door. Got him a mic?
Oh, hang on. I got a two-part.
All right.
I got you.
Couple different things going on. First of all, obviously, canvassing, calling, doing everything we can do, working together, does a lot of the legwork for us and for the movement, for everything that we stand for. But as you know, and we all know, thanks to probably the most part Julian Assange with the Donna Brazils and the Debbie Wasserman Schultz, what happened 4 years ago in the primaries, for instance, and the slanted kind of rigging, I could go into examples, but you know it. If anybody, we all know what was happening in terms of that crapola. And then secondly, socialized medicine, socialized education is not a new thing. Totally awesome, totally for it. And you can still maintain a competitive capitalist model. You know, that's not socialism, period. Anyway, but would it help to bring up New Deal economics from FDR and the social programs?
Good.
You know, Social Security was...
All right, thank you. You raised a good question, which we do talk about. Okay. Yeah. Number one, in terms of the DNC, Democratic National Committee, I don't want to get into 2016 too much because we're in 2020 right now. We've got to keep our eyes on the future. But last time around, as some of you will remember, before the first popular vote was cast in Iowa, and then a week later here in New Hampshire, my opponent had 500 votes locked up from superdelegates. Remember that? That does not sound to me like a very fair process when one person before the first popular vote is cast already has 500 votes locked up. And I'm happy to tell you, as a result of a lot of work done by our people and people all over this country, we have not gone as far as I would want, but at least on the first ballot, no superdelegate will be casting a ballot. All right? I'm sorry, the second part of the second. Oh, right, FDR, right, all right, good. All right, we gave a speech on this, so let me summarize it. In my view, FDR was clearly one of the great presidents in American history, and he helped take a country out of the worst economic depression in our history, and also, defeat Nazism and fascism during World War II. One of the things, and I would urge people to go to YouTube and find this, there was a speech that Roosevelt gave in 1944. It was a State of the Union speech. Didn't get a whole lot of publicity because he was dead a year later, and that was kind of the end of World War II, and people were, preoccupied with the war. But this is what he said in essence. I'm paraphrasing him. He said, in our country, we have a Constitution and we have a Bill of Rights which protects our political freedoms, which is enormously important. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, the whole Bill of Rights and the Constitution. But he said, you know what? We do not have, and what we need is an economic Bill of Rights. All right? An economic Bill of Rights. And in a sense, that is exactly what this campaign is about. We have freedom of speech based on our Constitution. We should guarantee health care to all people as a human right as well. We have freedom of assembly. We should guarantee that every American able to work gets a decent job at decent pay. We have freedom of religion. We should also make sure that we have freedom and the right to get all of the education that we need regardless of our income. So to answer your question, that is exactly what this campaign is about. And that is incorporating economic rights as human rights. We are the wealthiest country in the history of the world. We're not a poor country. We can do these things. We can make sure that all of our kids, from pre-K through graduate school, get a quality education regardless of their income. We could do that. All right? It's not radical ideas. All right, gentleman right here.
Bernie, my name is Stephen Steiner.
Stephen?
I serve on the Budget Committee, ZBA, and Planning Board, and ran for the State Senate. I am a Republican, and I do support Donald Trump. A couple of things. No hatred,
sorry, right.
Please. No hatred. Give me my time.
Yeah.
A couple of things. How do you feel about the right to try that Donald Trump...
Right to what?
Right to try.
Right to try.
Right to try.
Well, no president is above the law. And if you're talking about after he leaves...
No. Right to try, folks, is when people are terminally ill, they can get whatever drugs that are in the pipeline. They can try. Doesn't matter how far
you're
they
talking
are.
about new experimental drugs.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right to try.
Yeah, in general. I mean, the answer is in general, yes.
Okay. Hold on. I got to use the other finger.
Sure.
Okay. The opiate problem hit my family more than once. When Donald Trump was in Londonderry, day before the primary in 2016, I got to not ask him a question, more gave him a directive, and that was to ask him to use his family, himself, use the bully pulpit of the White House to do something about the opiate problem. And he's now using his wife, because last time this happened was during Ronald Reagan, as we both know. How do you think he's handling the opiate situation?
Not well enough, because it is a major epidemic, a major serious problem in your state. It's a serious problem in my state. And I'll tell you what I think. Right now, as you may be aware, there are attorney generals, are you aware of this, from all over the country, have come together to put on trial the major opioid manufacturers. Did you know that? Okay. And one of the things that I wanted to do, and we wrote to the chairman, I'm on a committee called the Health Education Labor Committee, which deals with this stuff, and we said, Mr. Chairman, bring the opioid manufacturers into Washington, let them raise their hand under oath, and tell us when they knew that opioids were addictive. Okay? And you know what? I think this trial is going to show that Purdue and some other major manufacturers knew that it was addictive and yet they continued.
One, two, three.
Okay, what? Okay, are you listening, sir? Are you asking me a question, and I'm talking to you? Okay.
Okay.
Okay. And they knew what they were doing was addictive and dangerous. To my mind, if that in fact is true, they should be tried in a criminal basis.
Well, see, when my son died in 2001, a lot of love in here, I can hear it. When my son died in 2001, no one knew about the dangers of how bad OxyContin was. They only knew, the drug peddlers and all knew how high we could get off by washing off the outer coating and snorting OxyContin, okay? So,
But there was a point.
But they made the medicine for sick people, and
Hold
it
on.
got diverted.
I do know a little
But
bit about this. I'm on the committee. I mean, there was a point. I think in the beginning, you're right, it was made to deal with severe pain, and it does that. But there was a point when they knew that there were communities in West Virginia and Ohio where an enormous number of pills were coming in which had nothing to do with pain relief. They knew it. And if they knew it and they were passing around those pills, they should be held criminally responsible.
Well,
That's my view.
In my case, I will tell you that my ex-wife diverted the medication from a bad doctor. That's how my son ended up. Now,
I'm sorry for your loss.
And now, just fast forward to just another tragedy in my family I want to share.
Yeah, I think. Come on, sir, you've had two questions, more than anybody else. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, other questions? Okay. Yeah, I got a woman over there. Yes, ma'am. Get her a mic.
Thanks. I'm going to speak to the other side of that just a little bit.
Okay.
I am an advocate for chronic pain disability and migraine disability.
Yep.
I have been a proponent of socialized medicine since I was a teenager, and I am pushing 50. Here's my other thing that needs to go along with socialized medicine. The decisions need to be made between the doctor and the patient. I hear anecdotally from so many other pain sufferers how they just get cut off. We have a friend of our family who was a stage 4 pancreatic cancer. She went into a hospitalization before hospice. They cut her off and put her in detox because they said a stage 4 pancreatic cancer person who was going to die couldn't have pain medication. I have to fight with my health insurance company every 6 months for them to cover a really small amount of pain medication. Somebody in the government or somebody who doesn't have a medical degree should not be making those decisions for me. That should be between the doctor and the patient.
All right. What she is saying, and to some degree what this gentleman was saying, I think, is, look, opioids are used to deal with severe pain, and they work. What we have seen recently is opioids being used for other reasons. So I don't think it is that hard to do two things. We're going to crack down on those people who are selling opioids and getting people addicted, but that does not mean to say that people who have severe pain with their doctor's, approval can use opioids. That's not a complicated issue. So I think that's the answer, ma'am. We could do both. Okay, let me get one or two more questions. Ma'am, right here. Yeah. I can't hear you. Stand. Can you stand or not?
Oh, thank you, Senator Sanders. Two things. My name is Geraldine Russo, and I had a family member die in Sandy Hook, an educator, Lauren Russo. I can't believe it's taken so long. Every time something happens, it brings it all back. Now, the NRA is very powerful, and really it's all about the money, and they're buying all the congressmen and all the government people. What is your plan for trying to get the gun control passed so that this doesn't happen again? Also, I've been listening to all of your Medicare for All, and I agree with it. I lived in Canada, and I'm just wondering how you propose to get the healthcare industry, which is another big lobby group, to buy into your Medicare for All, because I really believe it should happen for everyone. Thank you.
They're not going to buy into it. All right. I mean, this is what I meant earlier. They made $100 billion last year. They're not going to buy into this. They have to be defeated. And we need to move away from a healthcare system designed to make billions in profit for them to a Medicare for All nonprofit system. So they're not going to buy into it. We have to take them on and defeat them. All right, in terms of the NRA, and I'm sorry for your loss. Sorry for your loss. We have people here who have lost, relatives who should not have been killed, died. And, taking on the NRA is a political issue. And I want to say this. We are, in fact, winning the struggle, not as fast as I want. Now, Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader in the Senate, refuses to bring up gun safety legislation. But he is now on the defensive, as is the NRA. What we saw after Parkland, you remember Parkland in Florida? We saw these kids who had experienced a tragedy that is unbelievable that any child has to go through. And they stood up and they fought back. They got young people all across this country involved in the political process, and they had some real success in electing people who understood the need for gun safety legislation. So we have got to put as much pressure as we can on Mitch McConnell, and the message is very simple. Listen to the American people, not just the NRA. And if he does that, we're going to pass good legislation. Okay, last question. Ma'am. Yep, last question. Okay, just her, just please. Okay, yeah.
Hi, hello. I just moved here 2 years ago from a suburb of Philadelphia, Ryan Costello's old district. Feel like our family's only hope. We have 2 autistic children. We incurred $200,000 in medical debt and had to go into bankruptcy because their therapies weren't covered.
So in order to cover your autistic kids, you went $200,000 in debt and you went into bankruptcy because of that? Okay.
Yes. In 2013, I was an operating room nurse in North Philadelphia at a level 1 trauma center. And during a double homicide, I got injured and lost my career and lost my home and lost my car. We came up here to New Hampshire for a brand new life, which I believe that we're going to get. But the biggest thing people need to know about healthcare is working in the hospital. I saw the people who had no health care, who waited till they were really, really sick, almost dead, come through the ER, and then they could get covered because it was an emergency. That's the deal. You can't turn them away. But the ones that were the worst were the ones who were too embarrassed to come to the ER, and some of those patients became organ donors because they got so sick from a tiny infection that they were too ashamed to go to the ER. What they did was they just let it go till it was too bad, then it was too late. This is a critical issue. What can we do to make people see a different perspective? Okay. Healthcare for all has to be done.
It is. And I want to tell you, and I wish I could tell you it's happening faster, but as I mentioned earlier, poll after poll now shows the American people do support Medicare for all. Okay? Now, your point is not only did your family go bankrupt, but as a nurse, you saw people who died because they didn't get to the hospital and to the doctor when they should. And by the way, when you go to the emergency room, as you know, that's the most expensive form of primary health care that's out there. All right? So what we are doing and what we are trying to do here is pass legislation that makes health care all right. That means you go to the doctor when you want to go. You know, in Canada, people don't appreciate this. I was up in Toronto 2 years ago, I think it was. Went into a hospital, very nice. In Canada, if you have major surgery and you're in the hospital for a month or 3 weeks, do you know what your bill is when you leave? Zero. And they spend 50% less than we do per person on health care. You go to any doctor you want. You go to any hospital that you want, because the function of their system is to provide health care to all, not to make $100 billion in profits for the health care industry. So I think Medicare for All would address the issues that you are talking about in terms of opening the doors to everybody and in terms of preventing bankruptcies. All right, let me just conclude by thanking everybody for coming out on this rather warm evening here. We need your help to win here in New Hampshire. Let's go forward together. Thank you all very much.